The coat had been hanging on the hook by the back door since November. Dark wool, charcoal gray, the one Darnell wore to church and to client dinners and to every occasion that required him to look like the kind of man who had his life together. It had been hanging there so long that Nora had stopped seeing it. That's how it works in a marriage. Things become furniture. People become wallpaper. You stop looking closely because you think you already know what's there. She was taking it to the dry cleaner on a Thursday morning in December. Bree's winter concert was the following weekend, and Darnell had mentioned wanting to look sharp when she slipped her hand into the left breast pocket to check for stray pens. Her fingers found paper. A receipt. Folded twice. From a jewelry store in Charlotte, North Carolina. The date stamped at the top was February 14th. Nora stood in her kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, in her coat and her work shoes, holding a piece of paper that weighed nothing and changed everything. She read it 3 times. A diamond tennis bracelet. $4,280. Paid in cash. Cash. She thought about Valentine's Day. She thought about how Darnell had kissed her forehead that morning and said he wished he didn't have to go, that the timing was terrible, that the Atlanta conference was non-negotiable. She thought about how Bree had a recital that evening and how Darnell had pressed his hand against his chest like a man taking an oath and said, she could still hear the exact tone of his voice, "I swear on these kids, Nora. If there was any way I could be here, I would be." He had not been in Atlanta. He had been in Charlotte. And he had not come home empty-handed. Just not to this home. Nora Calloway was 47 years old. She taught high school chemistry in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of teacher students remembered 20 years later because she had the rare ability to explain invisible things in ways that made them feel real. She believed in evidence. She believed in process. She believed that if you observed carefully enough and long enough, the truth would always reveal its structure. She had been married to Darnell Calloway for 19 years. They had 3 children. Marcus was 17, quiet and serious, already researching engineering programs. Jade was 15, a volleyball player with her father's laugh and her mother's stubbornness. And Brianna, had just turned 11 and still believed the world was mostly good, which Nora worked every single day to protect. Darnell was a regional sales director for a logistics company. He was charming in the way that men who sell things for a living are charming, naturally, effortlessly, and with a warmth that felt personal until you realized it worked equally well on strangers. He traveled for work. He had a firm handshake and a good memory for names. He coached Marcus's basketball team for 2 seasons when Marcus was younger and still talked about it like it was the defining act of his fatherhood. He was the kind of man people described as a good man. He was not a good man. Nora did not explode. She did not confront him. She did not call her sister or show up at his office or throw the coat in the trash. She put it back on the hook, and she started counting. The first thing she did was go back through their credit card statements, 3 years of them, methodically, the way she graded lab reports, looking for patterns instead of answers. She wasn't looking for a single smoking gun. She was building a timeline. And what the timeline showed her was not the work of a man who had made a mistake in a weak moment. It was the work of a man with a schedule. Hotel charges in cities that aligned with his travel calendar, but not with the client accounts he managed. Restaurant bills on evenings he had texted her that he was grabbing fast food alone at the hotel. A cell phone line she didn't recognize on a family plan addendum she had never seen, because the bill went to a P.O. box she didn't know existed. A P.O. box. He had rented a P.O. box. Nora wrote that down in her notes app under a folder she labeled grocery lists and moved on. 4 nights later, she borrowed his laptop to print a permission slip for Jade's volleyball tournament. His browser autofilled an email address she didn't recognize when she clicked the address bar. She wrote it on a post-it note and tucked it inside her copy of the Poisonwood Bible on the bedroom shelf and said nothing. It took her 6 days to figure out the password. Same formula he used for everything. The year they married, followed by the first initials of all 3 children. MGB. He had used their children's initials as the key to the account he used to hide from them. The account had 4 years of emails. Her name was Celeste Okafor. She was 38, a sales representative for a competing logistics firm based in Charlotte. She was, based on what Nora could piece together from the emails, funny, direct, and completely unaware that the man she had been seeing for 4 years had a wife and 3 children in Columbus. Because Darnell had told Celeste he was divorced. He had told her his marriage ended badly. That his ex-wife. And here was the part that Nora had to read twice, then set the phone face down on the nightstand and breathe for a moment. That his ex-wife was emotionally unstable. Controlling. That she made it difficult for him to see his kids. That he was doing his best to parent from a distance while protecting himself from a woman who, in his version of events, was the reason his life had been so hard. He had taken Nora's real life, the one she was living while he was lying, and handed it to another woman as an excuse. He had made her the villain of a story she didn't know existed. Has anyone ever used your name, your real life, to lie to someone else? Drop a comment below. We want to hear from you. There is a particular kind of rage that doesn't make noise. It doesn't throw things or raise its voice. It sits very still at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. while the house is quiet and everyone who depends on you is asleep, and it calculates. That is what Nora felt. Not the hot, immediate kind of anger that burns out quickly. The cold, architectural kind that builds something. She did not confront Darnell. She called a forensic accountant named Roland Uchabe, a referral from a colleague whose own divorce had gotten complicated in financial ways. Roland was precise and unhurried, and when Nora spread her documentation across his conference table, he looked at it the way a surgeon looks at a scan. Carefully. Without drama. 2 meetings later, he found what Nora had suspected but couldn't prove alone. Darnell had used their home equity line of credit, a joint account Nora had signed paperwork for years ago during a refinance she hadn't scrutinized closely enough, to fund a secondary investment account. The account had been drawn down over 4 years. More than $40,000 had moved through it in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts. Some of it had been reinvested. Some of it was simply gone. Roland took off his glasses and said, "Whoever put this documentation together did exceptional work." "I put it together," Nora said. He nodded slowly. "Then you already know what you have." She did. But what she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that Celeste Okafor had been doing her own counting. And what Celeste had found was going to change everything. Nora filed for divorce on a Wednesday in March. She had the papers served to Darnell at his office at 11 in the morning during a presentation he was giving to his regional leadership team. She learned later from his assistant Priya, who had always liked Nora, always asked about the kids at the company Christmas party, that the process server had walked in, said Darnell's name, and handed him the envelope in front of 12 people. That Darnell had stood very still for a long moment, that the room had gone completely silent, that he had excused himself and not come back. Nora was teaching her second period class when it happened. Limiting reagents. The concept that in any chemical reaction, one component runs out first and determines how much product you can make. She had written the equation on the board and was asking her students which element was the limiting reagent when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She knew without looking what it meant. She kept teaching. Darnell did not come home that night. Or the next. He stayed at a hotel, she knew because Marcus, who had a tracking app on the family phone plan for emergencies, mentioned casually that Dad's phone showed him near the Marriott on Broad Street. When he finally came back 4 days later, it was not to apologize. He had hired a lawyer, and his lawyer had a strategy. Darnell's position, according to the letter Nora received from his attorney, was that the marriage had been deteriorating for years due to mutual dysfunction. That the financial account Roland had flagged was a legitimate investment vehicle Nora had full knowledge of. That Darnell was a devoted father seeking equal custody of all 3 children and would pursue it aggressively, if necessary. He was going to use the children again. Even now. Even here. Nora read the letter at the kitchen table. She set it down. She made herself a cup of tea. Then she called Roland, her own attorney, a woman named Pamela Voss who is known in Columbus family court for being thorough in a way that opposing counsel found exhausting, and she said, "He's going to fight." "Good," Pamela said. "Let him spend the money." 3 weeks passed. Nora kept teaching, kept driving Jade to volleyball, kept helping Marcus with his applications, kept sitting with Bree through her homework. The house ran because Nora ran it. It had always run because Nora ran it. She understood that now with a clarity she hadn't had before. And then her phone rang on a Saturday morning. Unknown number. Columbus area code. Is this Nora Calloway? It is. A pause. My name is Celeste Okafor. I got your letter. Nora had written the letter 6 weeks earlier. She had not expected a response. She had sent it to the address she found in the emails, a condo in Charlotte, with a copy of their marriage certificate, a copy of the children's birth records, and a Christmas photograph. She had written 2 paragraphs. Factual. No blame directed at Celeste. Closed with, "You deserve to know who you were actually dealing with." She had sealed the envelope and walked it to the mailbox herself on a Tuesday evening after Bree went to bed. And now Celeste was on the phone. "I need you to know," Celeste said, "that I had no idea." "I believe you," Nora said. And she did. Silence stretched between them, 2 women on opposite ends of the same lie, breathing carefully. "He told me you were unstable," Celeste said. "I know," Nora said. "I read the emails." Another pause. "How long have you known?" "About 4 months." "I've known for 6 weeks," Celeste said. "Since your letter arrived. And I've been going through everything since then. Every text, every wire transfer, every time he gave me cash for things. I'm a data person, Nora. I work in logistics, so I went through everything." Nora set down her tea. What did you find? What Celeste had found was this. Over 4 years, Darnell had transferred money to her, not gifts. He had framed them as shared investment contributions to a property he claimed they were going to buy together in Charlotte. A future. A life he had promised her. She had contributed $30,000 of her own money into an account he controlled. The account was the same secondary investment vehicle Roland had flagged. Darnell hadn't just stolen from his own marriage. He had been stealing from both women simultaneously and running the money through the same account. Celeste had the transfer records. She had screenshots of every conversation in which Darnell had asked her for money and explained why. She had voicemails. She had a paper trail so clean and complete that when Nora's attorney Pamela reviewed it, she sat back in her chair and said, "He didn't just defraud a marriage. This is wire fraud." Nora and Celeste met in person exactly once before everything unraveled. A Saturday in April, a coffee shop in Dayton, neutral ground, halfway between Columbus and Charlotte, Celeste had driven up. Nora had brought Roland's preliminary report. Celeste had brought a folder of her own. They sat across from each other for a moment before either spoke. They were nothing alike in appearance. Nora was tall, composed, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. Celeste was younger, smaller, with the kind of restless energy that people who work in sales develop, always scanning the room. But they had the same look in their eyes when they spread their documents across the table. The look of women who had done their homework. "I want him to pay back what he took from me," Celeste said. "So do I," Nora said. "And I want something else." "What?" "I want him to lose the story. The one where I'm the unstable ex-wife and you're the patient girlfriend, and he's the man who had no other choice." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "How do we do that?" Nora opened Roland's folder. "We tell the truth. All of it. In the right places. At the right time. 2 women. 1 man. 1 account. What would you have done if you were Celeste? Tell us in the comments. And if you're watching this with someone, good. This is the kind of story you watch together." Pamela Voss filed an amended divorce complaint in May. It now included Roland's full forensic report, Celeste's transfer documentation, the wire fraud evidence, and a detailed accounting of every expense Darnell had filed with his employer for trips that were personal, not professional. Celeste filed a separate civil suit against Darnell for fraudulent misrepresentation and recovery of funds. His attorney, the one who had sent the aggressive letter about mutual dysfunction and devoted fatherhood, withdrew from the case 3 weeks later. The official reason filed with the court was a conflict of interest. The unofficial reason, which Priya mentioned to Nora at the grocery store, was that Darnell had misrepresented the facts of his situation to his own lawyer. He had lied to the man he hired to defend him. Darnell hired a second attorney. Then the second attorney received the full amended filing and called Darnell's employer's legal department, not to report anything, simply to clarify a jurisdictional question about one of the business expense claims. That was enough. Darnell's company had its own legal obligations once the expense fraud was flagged in a court document. They opened an internal investigation. He was placed on paid administrative leave within the week. And here, this is the part that Nora had not planned, had not orchestrated, had not even anticipated. Darnell called her. Not his attorney. Not his mother. Not a friend.
Nora.
She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. His voice was different. The smoothness was gone. He sounded like a man standing in a room that had run out of exits. Nora. Darnell. I need you to, he stopped. Started again. I need you to consider, for the kids, I need you to think about what this does to them if their father.
Don't, she said.
Nora. Don't use them. You don't get to use them anymore. Silence. I made mistakes, he said finally. The words sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced them. I made serious mistakes, and I know that. But if you could just... The time to ask me for something, Nora said quietly, was before you swore on our children's names while you were lying to my face. I'm going to hang up now.
She did.
What happened next took 4 months to fully land. But when it did, it landed completely. The divorce was finalized in September. 14 months after Nora found a folded receipt in a coat pocket on a Thursday morning. The settlement was not what Darnell's first attorney had threatened. There was no aggressive custody battle. There was no narrative about a deteriorating marriage and mutual dysfunction. Because Darnell's second attorney had reviewed everything and given his client the only honest advice a lawyer can give when the evidence is that thorough.
Take the settlement.
Nora received the house, the full equity value minus the funds that could be traced and recovered. She received primary physical custody of Marcus, Jade, and Bree. Darnell received supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent on completion of a financial counseling and family therapy program approved by the court. The retirement accounts were divided, but the marital waste finding, Roland's report had made it iron-tight, meant the division favored Nora significantly. The $40,000 in the secondary account was ordered returned, split between Nora's marital estate and Celeste's civil recovery. Celeste settled separately for the $30,000 she had contributed, plus legal fees. Darnell's company concluded its internal investigation in October. He was terminated. The expense fraud amount was not large enough to warrant criminal prosecution, but it was large enough to ensure that anyone who looked him up, and in his industry, people look, would find a public record of the civil findings attached to the divorce proceedings. He did not get another sales director position. The last Nora heard, through Priya, he was doing independent contractor work. Marcus never said much about it, the way 17-year-old boys don't. But on the morning the divorce was finalized, he came downstairs before school and found Nora at the kitchen table with her coffee, and he sat down across from her, the same spot where Darnell used to sit, and he said, "You okay, Mom?" "Yes," she said. "You did good," he said. And he said it the way young men say important things, quickly, looking slightly to the side, meaning everything. Jade went quieter for a few months and then gradually became herself again. Volleyball helped. Her team made regionals. Bree drew a picture for school around Thanksgiving. The assignment was someone brave, and she drew Nora standing in the kitchen. Nora found out about it when Bree's teacher mentioned it at parent-teacher conferences, voice a little careful, the way teachers get when they want you to know something without overstepping. She described you as the person who fixes things when they break, the teacher said. Nora drove home with her hands very steady on the wheel and let herself cry in the parking lot of the Kroger on Henderson Road before she went inside to buy groceries. 2 minutes. Then she wiped her face, went in, and got what was on the list. Nora and Celeste still text. Not often. They are not friends the way people who chose each other are friends. They are something else. Something without a clean name. Women who shared a wound and chose, independently, not to let it be the most important thing about them. Celeste started her own small consultancy in Charlotte. She told Nora once in a text that she had started running in the mornings, which she had always meant to do and never had, and that it turned out she was actually good at it. Nora texted back. Makes sense. You already knew how to go the distance. Bree still asks questions. She is 11 and she is processing things in the way children do, not all at once, but in small installments, over dinner, in the car, at bedtime when the lights are out. On a Tuesday evening in November, she was sitting at the kitchen table while Nora graded papers, and she asked, "Mom, what does it mean when someone swears on something?" Nora looked up from the lab report she was marking. "It means they're making a promise so serious that they're using something they love as proof they mean it."
Bree thought about this.
"And what happens if they break it?" "Then whatever they swore on," Nora said carefully, "knows the truth, even if they don't say so." Bree turned that over for a while. Then she went back to her homework. Nora went back to her grading. The kitchen was warm. The dog was asleep by the radiator. Outside the window, the first real snow of the season was beginning to fall over Columbus, quietly, covering everything in white. Here is what nobody tells you about surviving a betrayal this deep. It does not end the moment you win. There is no single moment where the music swells and you feel it is over. It ends the way it began, gradually, quietly, in the ordinary hours of an ordinary life. It ends when you realize you went an entire day without thinking about him, then 2 days, then a week. It ends when your daughter draws you as someone brave and you believe her. It ends when you are standing in a grocery store parking lot crying, and then you dry your face and go inside and buy what is on the list. And it begins again, the rest of it, the part that belongs to you. Every single morning that you wake up in the house you kept, in the life you rebuilt, in the truth you chose to tell when it would have been so much easier to stay quiet. Nora Calloway chose not to be quiet. She chose to count, to document, to call Roland Achebe and Pamela Voss, and eventually, on a Saturday morning, to answer a phone call from a woman she had every reason to resent, but chose instead to understand. She did not get revenge. She got something that lasts longer. She got the house. She got the kids. She got the truth on the record. And the man who swore on his children's names every time he needed to cover a lie, he got the truth too. Just not on his timeline. Not on his terms. And not before 2 women he had underestimated finished comparing notes.